A few minutes to. All right, it says we're broadcasting, so people should start coming in here now. I'm just gonna give us a minute or two for people to start getting into the room. There we go. We got about 23 people in here, and I'm sure more are coming. Usually takes a few minutes. I'm Charles Max Wood. I'm here with Josh Doody. Josh, do you want to say hi?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Here, I'll just lock you in. I'll be in the little window down in the corner. Yeah, we're going to be talking about fearless salary negotiation today. Josh has agreed to come on and talk to you all for free, which is really cool. And just let you know what goes into negotiating a salary. And when I read the book, a lot of it just made sense to me. It's stuff that I had thought through because I'm writing a book on how to find a job, but he just walks you through the entire process. I mean, if there's a step-by-step, this is it. And yeah, he's giving you all the good stuff for free, which is super nice. So everybody in the chat, just, say hi, thanks, give him a big hand, whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and let Josh start talking to us about salary negotiations. But keep in mind that, yeah, the process starts a little bit earlier than you would think. And if I had known all this stuff way back in the day, then, I mean, I probably would have been making way more money, because a lot of times I just let them give me the salary number, and I could have done so much better for myself. So Josh, where were you 10 years ago, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I was making mistakes so that I could write this book. So gotcha. I had some learning to do.
All right. Well, I think you have some slides, so if you want to pull those up and share your screen, we'll go ahead and let you get started.
Absolutely. Let's see here.
And as they say in my Toastmasters group, Mr. Josh Doody. And then they shake hands. You take it from there.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Let me... Great. So I think you should be seeing my slides.
Yep, looks great.
Let me just confirm that you're seeing the right slides. Yep. Okay, great. Good. So thanks a lot, Chuck. I appreciate it. Like Chuck said, I tend to focus on giving as much useful information as I can. So I don't know how many of you folks have attended other webinars, but this is a webinar where I'm going to give you really useful information. And my goal is that when you finish up today, you'll leave and you'll say, aha. You'll have, not just one or two, but maybe 3 or 4 aha moments, some really good tactics that you can use if you're interviewing soon, or if you're negotiating your salary soon, or both, to do better in your interviews, to negotiate a better salary, and to avoid some pretty common mistakes. Before I jump in, I'll just tell you a little about myself. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Josh Doody. I'm pretty easy to find online. If you just Google Josh Doody, I'm like the whole first page of Google results, thanks to my unusual last name. I have about 10 years of experience as a consultant, project manager, product developer in the talent management software industry, which means that I spent about 10 years working with companies and consulting with companies on how to manage performance reviews, set goals for folks, do career planning, succession planning, compensation planning, and that's sort of the key that gave me the material I needed to write this book, along with my own personal experience. So I've consulted with companies on how they pay people and how they decide how much money is available for different pay grades and all that good stuff. I rolled all that into my book, Fearless Salary Negotiation, and what you're going to see here today is some highlights from a couple of chapters in my book. And again, my goal is to give you really useful information that you can use if you have interviews or salary negotiations coming up in the short term, but even in the long term. So next time that you're changing jobs, you have interviews, you're going to negotiate your starting salary, this will give you some very specific tactics that you can use to do better, to stand out from other candidates, and to negotiate a higher starting salary. So a really quick overview. There are 2 high-level topics that I want to talk about today. We're going to break this into kind of 2 parts. So after the first part, we're going to pause. I'm going to take some questions. I think you will probably have some questions. Then we'll do the second part, and we'll pause again at the end for more questions. So first, we're going to talk about how to prepare for your interviews. So some people may be comfortable with this. My guess is that most people are not. And so this is an extremely tactical section on things that you can do to stand out from other candidates. This part of my book and my expertise I've developed as a hiring manager. So I've interviewed lots of people, I've hired many people, and I'm using that experience to tell you what I was looking for as a hiring manager. And then we're going to talk about salary negotiation, and I'm going to give you a high-level strategy overview on salary negotiation, how to do it, what to look for, and some, again, specific tactics that you can use to negotiate your starting salary with very little practice just by putting these tactics into play. So let's start with how to prepare for your job interviews. The first thing that you need to do when you have a job interview coming up is to do some basic research on the company that you're interviewing with. When I say basic research, I mean very basic. I'm talking 10 or 15 minutes on Google, online, on their website, if they have a corporate blog, reading news articles that were written about them. This is really basic research so that you can learn more about the company that you're interviewing with. Just knowing information about the company, how they do business, what they're trying to accomplish, what products they sell, who their customers are, all those little things, just knowing them will make you a better, more appealing candidate when you're interviewing for jobs. So basic research is the first thing that you need to do before you ever go into an interview. This only literally takes 10 or 15 minutes on Google. You're just looking for the basics, the high-level stuff about the company that other people probably won't take time to look up. And again, as a hiring manager, this is something that really stood out to me is within the first minute or two of an interview, I could usually tell if this was a person who had just sent out a ton of resumes and happened to get an interview, or if it was a person who had really done their homework, was interested in the specific company that I worked for and the specific role that I was trying to fill. That would help them to stand out for me because I would know that they were serious about it. They were really interested in getting a job or this job at the company I was hiring for, as opposed to just trying to get any job. Once you have basic information, then you can start to employ my sort of high-level interview strategy. And it is by understanding what their story is that you can employ that strategy. So the strategy is that you want to understand the company's story with that research that you did, with information that you gather throughout the interview process, to tell a story about how the company will be better if you're a part of it. So first you learn their story, and then your job in the interview, if you have a single job, your single job in the interview process is to help tell a story about how the company will be better if you're a part of the company. So the entire way, all you're doing is convincing them that they should bring you on board because you will help make their company better. And if you think about that at the high level as you go through your interviews, you'll find that you're able to give better answers to questions because you're thinking about them. They ask you a question, you give an answer that helps tell that story as opposed to talking just about yourself or some technical expertise that you might have. Instead, you turn that around, answer the question focused on the company and how you can make their story better. So that's kind of high-level strategic stuff, right? Do basic research, tell a story about how the company will be better if you're a part of it. But I also want to give you some general guidelines that you can use that are, these are, again, I mentioned the word tactics a lot. These are specific things that you can think about as you prep for your interviews. So the first one is be early. If you are late to an interview, you have immediately, you may not disqualify yourself from the interview, but you will make it really hard for the company to be interested enough to make you an offer. And the reason is, if you can't show up on time for an interview, then what sort of engagement level will you have as an employee? So if you're trying to convince them to hire you and you still can't show up on time, how often are you going to be on time once you've already got the job and that paycheck is more or less guaranteed every 2 weeks? So what does early mean? If you have a phone or video conference set up, early means 5 minutes before the scheduled start time that you are seated and ready to take the call. So this means that you've got your desk cleared off, you're sitting at your desk, you've got the phone in front of you, you got your earbuds plugged in, whatever you're doing, and you're ready to take that call or start the video conference 5 minutes before the scheduled start time. So that as soon as they ping you, because usually the hiring manager will reach out to you, as soon as they do that, you'll be able to hit answer and go, right? So that's what being early means if you're on a virtual interview. If you're in person, being early means showing up about 15 minutes before the interview starts. So you're at the venue where you're doing the in-person interview 15 minutes before it starts. And this will make sure, if you're meeting at Starbucks, it gives you time to grab your coffee, sit at a table, grab them some coffee, find somewhere to sit that's in a nice corner or something so you can have a nice conversation. Or if you're meeting at an office park or something like that, you can get to the reception desk, you can check in, you can get your visitor badge. The sponsor that needs to take you up to the 3rd floor can come down and let you in. All that stuff needs to happen before your interview is supposed to start. So be early for phone calls and video conferences, 5 minutes, 15 minutes for in-person interviews. Be ready. So this is sort of a follow-on to be early, but what it ultimately means is make sure that you have completely prepared to start the interview. So if you need to use the restroom or you need to get water before you start interviewing, make sure you've already done that. Like I said, if you need to get a badge or get checked in to the location that you're interviewing at, you've already done that. If you're doing a video call or a phone call, you're in a room with the door closed so that once they call, you can go. So you don't want to answer the phone on time and then say, oh yeah, thanks for calling. Hold on a second. Let me just go close this door and let my dog outside. That's not a good way to make a good impression on a hiring manager. You want to be ready. As soon as they call, you say, hi, I'm expecting your call. It's so great to talk to you. And then you can start talking about whatever questions they have on their mind. So be ready before the interview starts. You're completely ready. You're ready to engage 100% with the person that's interviewing you. Again, on phone calls, doors closed, the phone's in front of you, you're ready to go. In person, this means you already used the restroom, you grabbed water if you needed it, you got coffee if you need it, and you're seated and ready to go for the interview to begin at the time that it's scheduled to start. Once you start interviewing, you want to immediately try to get to know your interviewer. Usually interviews will start with a sort of feeling out period where the interviewer will be asking you questions about yourself and just kind of getting to know you. Kind of if I'm pulling back the curtain a little bit, what's really going on in this phase of the interview is there's a good chance that the interviewer doesn't know who you are yet, and that they haven't even looked at your resume. So I would say probably 50% or more of the time when you're interviewing with someone and you see them pull out your resume and they start looking down at it and asking you questions, they're doing that because they don't know who you are and they've never seen your resume before. And I know how discouraging this can be for someone who's working hard to find the right role and you're preparing for your interviews. But the bottom line is that hiring managers are busy people and they probably came from another interview right before they talked to you. They may have just scarfed down their lunch trying to get ready to talk to you. They may have been in another meeting that they cut short to come talk to you. They probably have not sat down and done homework to figure out who you are. You've done that for them, but they haven't done that for you. So spend some time getting to know them, allow that feeling out period to sort of happen, and let them start asking you questions about who you are. And just be friendly and open and get to know them and start to build rapport with them, because a lot of interviewers are looking for people that they want to work with. Who's somebody that I want to work with, that I'm comfortable working with? And so you can start that process immediately when you sit down on time, ready to go, and just start talking to them. Also, make sure that you listen. This may seem obvious, but you want to be absolutely sure that you're listening carefully to the interviewer. You're listening very carefully to the questions that they're asking you. You're getting to know them and learning about them and what makes them tick, as opposed to just sort of tuning out and talking about your expertise and your experience. You want to make sure that you're engaged and demonstrating to them that you're listening carefully to what they're saying. Because again, they're thinking, do I want to work with this person? Once they have your resume, they know pretty much what your technical expertise is. You might have a technical interview at some point, but for the most part, job interviews are a feeling out period where the hiring manager is trying to figure out if they want somebody like you working with them and their team, and what sort of an asset you'll be to their team. You do that by listening and giving good answers to their questions and not just sort of rote, pre-considered, pre-written answers. Also take notes. This is a way to demonstrate that you're listening. But taking notes is an opportunity to show that you're engaged, and also just to make sure that you are able to follow up later on after the interview. So you want to be sure that after the interview is over, if there are any questions where you didn't know the answer, then you've gotten an answer, you have a good feeling of what it is that they were looking for, and you can review your notes and then get back to them and say, hey, by the way, I didn't know the answer to that question. I looked it up. Here's what I came up with. Just thought I'd let you know. So take notes. You're going to want to jot things down. And this also shows, it demonstrates that you're actually engaged and that you're paying attention. So in person, you'll want to have a notebook, some paper. You should have copies of your resume available anyway. So in that same notebook, you can carry your copies of your resume, a pen, and some paper, and you can just jot notes down. You don't want to go crazy with this. You don't want to only take notes or hide behind your notebook, but use it as an opportunity to demonstrate that you're listening and you're 100% engaged in this interview, because this is a significant moment for you. And then, of course, if you're on a virtual interview, a phone call, or a video conference, you can take notes in something like Evernote or Notepad, or just type notes in. One kind of note of caution here: if you do take notes using a keyboard, make sure you tell the person that you're talking to, you know, you're going to hear me typing away on my keyboard. I just want to let you know I'm going to be taking some notes during our call. So I'm listening carefully to what you're saying, and I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss anything. That way they don't think you're goofing off on Facebook or messing around on Twitter or something like that. So what kind of questions can you expect in an interview? There are really just a few categories of questions. And so I'm going to walk through each of these categories of questions just to give you a sense of what it is that you can expect as you walk through your interviews. And if you're ready for all these categories of questions, you're probably going to be pretty prepared for your interview. So the first one is resume questions. I mentioned earlier that one of the first things a hiring manager will do is that they will start skimming your resume, try to learn about you and what your expertise is, and then start asking you questions based on what they see on your resume. So one of the first things they'll say is, oh, I see you went to University of Georgia. I see you went to Florida State University. And then, what did you think of that? How about the football team or whatever? And that's because they're buying time so they can skim your resume to find other things to learn about you and ask about. So this is how most interviews will start, right? And okay, so maybe BYU, Chuck. So I see you went to BYU. That's interesting. Tell me about that, right? And so as they're skimming your resume, they're going to ask you questions about it. So a word of caution here is, if it's on your resume, it's fair game. So just make sure that if you have stuff on your resume and somebody says, oh, I see that you have experience with C++. We actually have some C++ projects we're going to work on right now. Your response should not be, oh, I haven't touched C++ in 10 years. I hate that language. That shouldn't be on your resume. If you can't do C++ or don't want to do C++ for a job, it should either be not on your resume or it should be de-emphasized somehow. So it says, limited experience with, or past experience with, or something. Just make sure that the stuff that you're highlighting on your resume isn't just a big block of technologies that you've touched once or twice in your life. It's the key stuff that you would like to get a job working with. The reason is, if you kind of flip it around and think about what this would be like from a hiring manager's perspective, if I ask you about C++ and did you know we have a position open that has some of that work to be done, you say, I don't want to work with C++. As a hiring manager, now I'm wondering, how much of what I'm reading on this resume is legit? How much of this stuff is stuff you actually want to work with, and how much of it is just made up stuff that you did to make yourself look good? So it kind of works to maybe get your foot in the door, but once you're talking to somebody, that stuff can come back to haunt you, because they'll start asking you questions about it, and you'll start to look a little less genuine than you would like to look in an interview. So make sure your resume is current, it shows the stuff that you'd really like to work with, and de-emphasize or remove the stuff that you don't actually want to work with. Personal questions. So this is the next phase that I mentioned. They'll start asking you about personal questions, where you went to school, what your hobbies are. They see that you played basketball in high school and that kind of thing. And so they'll ask you questions about your hobbies and what you do. Be ready to talk about these. Again, you're looking to build rapport with the person who's interviewing you. And so this is an important part of the process. It's not a technical part of the process, but it's a part where the person who might hire you to do a job for them is getting to know you as a person and trying to figure out what it will be like to work with you 8 or 10 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. So be personable, answer the questions honestly, ask them questions about themselves. If they seem to be interested in something that you're interested, ask them what their experience is with that, and just chat with them. So you don't want to burn half an hour in your interview on this, but a 5 minutes or 7 minutes up front is a nice way to kind of get into the rhythm of an interview, especially for somebody like a hiring manager who spends all day, every day doing interviews. Technical interviews are something that I don't write a lot about in my book, and the reason is that there are tons of really good resources out there on how to do technical interviews. But this is something that I put in here because it is a type of question you'll be asked. And if you're interviewing for a job, and my guess is that most of the people here today, most of you guys joining us on this webinar, probably are interviewing for technical jobs, be aware if there's going to be a technical interview and learn what you can about what that technical interview will entail before you start that interview. So you just want to be sure that you know what technology they're going to test you on. If it's a whiteboard interview, or you're going to actually be writing code on a laptop, what sort of environment are they using? Just see if you can learn about that technical interview before you go in, because the more you know about the framework that they use for technical interviews, the more you can prepare for that particular framework and find the right tools and resources to help you get ready for a technical interview. Tools and technology. So this is back to what's written on your resume that I mentioned earlier. Just know that if you have tools and technology written on your resume, or there are specific tools and technology that the company uses to do its role, to create its product or provide its service, that you'll be asked about those things. So be ready to talk about tools and technology you have experience with. And if you can, before you interview, when you do that basic research, learn about what tools and technology the company is using. So most of the time, for example, figuring out what tech stack they're using isn't too hard. And you want to be sure that you're kind of up on that. If they're starting to use new frameworks or something like that, figure out what they're using so you can at least learn enough about it to talk about it, so that if you're not already proficient, you can say, well, I'm not proficient in that, but I have read up on it. And it looks like something that's very interesting that reminds me of this other technology that I've used, and I'm ready to learn this new tool or technology that you guys use for your company. And then the last two types of questions that you can expect are sort of paired, and that's special projects and challenging situations. So you want to make sure that when you're interviewing, you're ready to answer the question, so tell me about some special projects that you've done. Like, you know, give me an idea of a special project that you did and what your role was on that project. So what you need is a story to tell about a project you worked on. Usually a group project is better because you're almost always going to be interviewing for a team. And you want to make sure that you can tell a story about what the project was, what the goal of the project was, and what your specific role was on the project. So were you a project manager? Were you in charge of testing? And all these other good things that you might have contributed to that project. And then a follow-on for that is a challenging situation that you'll be asked about. So tell me about a challenging situation that you've encountered either in school or professionally, and how you overcame that challenge. And so if you can, you have the story about the special project. Think back to a time when you ran into an issue with that special project and how you overcame it as a team, and use that as your challenging situation. This helps the interviewer to really engage with your story, and also just makes it easier for you to tell your story about how you solved that challenge. So those are the 6 common types of interview questions that you can expect. And if you're ready for all 6 of these, you're probably well prepared for the interview, especially if you did your basic research early on. So we're coming to the tail end of the interview section here of my presentation, but also of the interview itself. So I've gone through this presentation in a way that's really similar to how most of your interviews would go. They have a cadence. Most interviews follow sort of the same cadence. And the reason is, it works, and again, most hiring managers are so busy that they don't have time to create new and inventive ways to interview people. They just need to get interviews knocked out. So you've come to the end of the interview. One of the last questions that you'll be asked is, do you have any questions for me? So that's something that you need to be ready for, because it's an opportunity for you to continue to demonstrate that their company will be better if you're a part of it, to tell that story, but also to learn more about the company and get intel that you can use the next time you interview with somebody at that company. So I'm going to give you 2 questions that you can ask to learn information about the company and stand out from other people who might be interviewing for the job. So let's look at the first one. The first question is, what does the long-term career path look like? So this seems like a simple question, but it does a couple of things for you. First of all, it shows that you're thinking long-term. So you're not just wondering, how can I get a job to get a paycheck next week? You're asking a question that shows that you're thinking about a year or 2 years out. And so you're asking, not only what is the role that I'm going to hopefully get and work with you in now, but what's the next role and the one after that? What does my career look like if I come work for your company? But it also gives you an opportunity to learn more about the responsibilities and things they need done, the jobs to be done at the company, so that you can learn more about what they're trying to accomplish, and so that you can use that information to get better answers to questions in future interviews. So that's question number 1. The second one is, what can you tell me about the team I'll be working with? I like this question a lot when I'm coaching people on how to do well in interviews, because you can learn a lot of really useful information about other people that might interview you with this question. So you might learn that Frank played basketball in high school, and that Tammy really likes old movies from the 50s and earlier, or whatever. And so these are small things, but they're things that you can be using in your future interviews to build rapport with the people who are interviewing you. And you could also learn about proclivities that they have that might give you an insight into how they're interviewing you. So maybe somebody is a little persnickety, and they'll say, yeah, you know, Tim, he's a little rough around the edges, but he's a good guy. He can be a little sandpapery. And so what that tells you is, when you're talking to Tim, if he interviews you, you shouldn't be put off if he's not really friendly or open, because you already know that his personality just isn't that way. So this will just give you information that you can use, intel that you can gather to do better in future interviews. Okay, so Chuck, we've hit our first opportunity for questions, and I know you've been monitoring the chat. So before I answer some questions, I want to tell everybody here that what you see on the screen here is a description of the Ultimate Salary Negotiation Bundle, which is a Fearless Salary Negotiation Edition bundle that has the interview cheat sheet, which will prepare you for interviews and is a nice 2-page little summary of what we just talked about, but also has 3 video courses, almost 3 hours of great video courses, worksheets that are interactive that you can use, email templates, case studies, and the book, of course, all those good things. And if you go to bit.ly/FSN-RR, that link that you see on the screen, then you can get that. Chuck, before you read our first question to us, I know that you're including a freebie, a nice bonus for people who buy Fearless Salary Negotiation before, I think it's next Monday at 11:59 p.m. So why don't you tell folks about that bonus, and then let's see what kind of questions we have.
Right. Before I do that, I just want to mention that I've read the Fearless Salary Negotiation book, and it is terrific. And it really is a step-by-step walkthrough of how to approach the job, how to approach the interview, and how to approach the negotiation, which we'll get into here in a minute, and really gives you a good look into how to negotiate a salary. And so I can't say enough good things about it. I've been really impressed with what Josh has pulled together here. I'm going to throw in, I recorded a video last week, and it's enhance your job search with meetups, email lists, and forums. So one of the things that Josh has talked about here a little bit is knowing the story of the company you're working for. And in a lot of cases, the best way to do that is to get involved with the people that work there. And so when you are looking for that job, when you're trying to find out about that company, if you start going to the meetups that the people who work there go to, if you start participating in the email lists and forums that they're in, then you can use specific strategies to get noticed. And once you're noticed, then you can use that to build relationships with the people who you will eventually approach to either get a job interview or who will be doing the job interviews. So I'm going to put that into the bundle if you buy before Monday the 10th. And if you pick that up, I'm selling it for $50, but you get it free if you buy it through this link before then. And if you go over to the offers on this particular webinar, you can see a link directly to it. And that'll get you this bundle and my video. Awesome.
Thanks, Chuck. So I know, I would love, obviously, for people to jump on that and get that bundle before the offer expires for that free bonus that you're adding on Monday. So just be aware of that. And I know that we have a couple of questions here.
I'll go ahead and jump in and read them, and then answer them. If I have anything to add, I'll just jump in.
Perfect.
Josiah asked, if you are a junior, can you make the same case for the benefit you bring to them? This was when you were talking about doing the interview and telling the story. He said, it feels like it's much more difficult than any strategies or ways of thinking if you are underexperienced, and underexperienced is in quotes.
Right. So a few things on that. Thanks for the question, Josiah. So first, you have to remember a few things. One is that you're interviewing for a junior position. So they're looking for somebody who's junior, right? Like if you're a junior person interviewing for a senior position, that's challenging. And you probably aren't a good fit for that position. But I'm assuming that the company that you're interviewing with is looking for somebody that's more junior. So they're looking for not just somebody who's junior, but they're looking for the best candidate that they can get for that junior position. And so to answer your question, yes, you can demonstrate value. Maybe it's not superior coding expertise or years of experience, but even the little things that I mentioned, like doing basic research and learning about the company, will demonstrate that as a junior developer or engineer, that you are more engaged and you're bringing more to the table than the other 7 candidates they're considering for the position. So it's all relative. If you're interviewing for a senior position, you want to be able to demonstrate superior expertise, the ability to collaborate, maybe the ability to mentor or manage people, to manage big projects, all those things that senior folks would do. As a junior person, you're not expected to do those things. So what you want to do is tell a story about how the company will be better if they hire you to fill that junior position they're already working to fill. So you're inexperienced, but they're looking to slot somebody into that position that's inexperienced. So just demonstrate that you're going to learn quickly. You can do that by doing basic research at the beginning, and demonstrate that you're engaged, you're paying attention, that you're learning from them as you go, and that you're technically proficient to the level that they expect for a junior developer. So it's all relative, and just remember, they're trying to fill a junior position, and you're trying to demonstrate to them that you're the best person for that position, and that their company is going to be better when they bring you on board in that position, which will make you stand out from most of the other candidates right away. Anything to add there, Chuck?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in. So the 3 full-time jobs that I had before I went freelance, they were all senior positions, and I was always a junior programmer applying to them, and I managed to get every job. And the reason is because I was able to get in and show them not just the value in my programming ability, which I'll admit on the first job was pretty low and lackluster. In fact, I said I don't know a whole lot when I was getting the technical interview done. However, what wound up happening was throughout the rest of the interview, it became pretty apparent that I would take the initiative, that I was self-teaching, and that I was doing a lot of the things that they wanted me to do. And because they were a consultancy that were essentially going to farm me out, the fact that they didn't have to babysit me or do any real work to train me, and that I would figure out what I needed to do in a reasonable amount of time, and that I could keep the clients happy, that just worked out. The second job, it was a lot of the same. I showed up, I talked about what I had done at the last job, showed initiative, demonstrated that I did have a baseline amount of technical skill, and I got hired at that job, and 3 months later, I was the team lead. The next job I got, I actually was told I didn't have enough experience for the job. But because, again, I had taken the initiative, I had set up continuous integration and other things at other jobs, and I could demonstrate that I could come in and immediately add value, even if it wasn't in deep technical experience, I was able to get that job as well. And that continued into freelancing as I started picking up clients. So I guess what I'm saying is yes, you can make the same case for your value. It's just that if you're a junior applying for senior jobs, it's harder, and you're going to pitch your value in different ways. But the thing that really happened was I showed them, Chuck will come and work for your company, and you can envision the good things that will happen when he does. And that's ultimately what got me those jobs.
Yeah, that's great insight, Chuck. I appreciate that you went through all 3 of those jobs and showed, how you made it work and how you made yourself really interesting to them, and showed that you were the right person for that job. And I think, you just have to remember, as a junior person, you're essentially being graded on a curve. Most hiring managers, when they're hiring someone junior, they're wondering, really what they're wondering is, how much work is it going to be for me as a hiring manager to manage this junior person? And your job is to help them to think it's not going to be work at all. This is going to be a great person to have on my team. And you do that by doing research and by demonstrating, like you just described, Chuck, that you'll be a big asset for their team. So as a junior person, if you can just convince them that you're not going to require a lot of handholding or guidance just to be up and running and do a productive job, that's a huge benefit to them as a company, that they don't have to train you from scratch and really hold your hand all the way. And so if you can just show them that you're going to be a self-starter, you're going to engage and do good work, then that's a big feather in your cap and will help you stand out from other candidates.
Yep. And to be honest, it only takes one employee where they were the most experienced technical person on the team and the biggest pain in the rear on the team for them to think, okay, this senior guy looks like he's going to be a handful, but if I hire this junior person, they're going to come in. Yeah, it may take them a month to get up to speed, but then they're going to be clicking along, and I'm not going to have to worry about them anymore. They're going to hire you.
Yep, that's a great point.
All right. The next question is how to tackle long interviews, like 4 hours or 4 different interviewers.
Yeah, so thanks for this question. I think, really the answer is, most of what you've learned in your basic research that we talked about at the beginning, you'll just use it over and over again. So if you're doing 4 different interviews, let's say you're doing 4 interviews that are an hour long apiece. As I mentioned, most of those interviews, you're going to start to feel deja vu, like on the 2nd or 3rd interview. They're going to feel very similar to you. It's just going to be a different person asking the questions. So most of the time, you're going to do the first one, you do the second. So it's not so much like mentally answering questions. It's going to be like a stamina challenge for you to get through 4 hours of talking. So just make sure that you're conscious of how your vocal cords feel. Get water and have water handy. Make sure that you stay calm. It's all sort of, you know, high level stuff like that, because once you've gone through 1 or 2 of those interviews, the last 2 interviews are going to just feel like rehashing. If anything, you'll have to fight boredom. So if it's a single 4-hour interview, that sounds like a technical interview to me. I am really struggling to think of any time that I experienced a 4-hour interview. So unless it was technical. So if you have a technical interview like that coming up, hopefully you know about it beforehand. Make sure that you ask, when are we going to take breaks? Can I take breaks? Is there going to be water available? And try to learn about the format of that 4 hours. If the more you can learn about what's going to happen during that 4 hours, the better you'll perform in there, because you can pre-plan for what you're going to do. So I don't have a whole lot of guidance on that very kind of specific situation, but if it's 4 interviews, 1 hour apiece, it'll be just the same thing over and over again. Do your homework beforehand and you'll be fine. If it's a single 4-hour interview, learn about all you can about the format of that interview, what's going to happen in that interview beforehand, so you can mentally prepare.
Yeah, the only thing I would add here is that if it's a 4-hour interview, I completely agree. They're going to take you back somewhere and make you write code. I've never seen a 4-hour interview that's anything else, unless it's 2 guys that wound up going to the same school and they're talking football, and they just lose track of time. I mean,
Right.
Other than that, yeah. So essentially, what they're going to do is they're going to pair you up with one of their technical people. You're going to sit down. You're going to write some code. So have some fun, build some good rapport, make the most of it. And yeah, if you have to take a break, then try and take a break with them and chat about something else, and just kind of build that camaraderie with them. Because if they get to the point where they see themselves working with you, then you're winning the interview. And the more they want you, the better you can do in your salary negotiation. As far as for different interviewers, the only thing I would add to that is that sometimes they bring in people from different departments or who would have different relationships with you at work. So if they bring in the HR person is really just looking for liability kind of things. So, man, if we hire them, you know, there's a red flag on the resume. We got to make sure that we're not going to get into trouble by hiring them. Or maybe there's some advantage to hiring you, some tax advantage or something else, depending on who you are. And there are all kinds of things that go into that. So they're just trying to make sure that, you know, it's not a mistake to hire you, or if there's some kind of advantage. Coworkers, they just want to know if they can sit next to you and code next to you and be happy with you. Your boss is looking for somebody that essentially makes his life better, because all he has to do is show up to his boss and say, guess what? This person is terrific and they're getting all their work done. I mean, that's all they want. They want to be able to go in and look good. And then anybody else they bring in, I mean, that's really all they're looking at too, is from their point of view, whatever their relationship is to you. So if they bring in marketing people or people outside of the coding team or executives or anything else, I mean, those folks are just looking for, what's it going to be like when I have to deal with this person? Am I going to be happy with it or not? And if you convince them that you're that person, then great. So just take some perspective. If you get 4 different interviewers and say, okay, who is this person and what do they really need to know?
Awesome. I see we've got, I think, 2 other questions. So
Alex asks,
yep.
Speaking of stories, have you either of you been in a situation where you wanted to walk out of the interview because the position turned out to be something else than you thought, or for any other reason?
So my answer to that is no. It is possible that would happen, but even if it does happen, I wouldn't walk out of the interview, because even if the position that you're interviewing for may not be what you thought it was, maybe there's another position that is what you thought it was. So there's a reason that you're in there, and it is possible that there was some sort of a clerical error where the person interviewing you, remember, if you kind of rewind to what I said about hiring managers, there's a good chance that the hiring manager who's sitting down to interview you was eating lunch 5 minutes before he started talking to you, or she started talking to you. And so it's very possible that they're interviewing you for a different position than you applied for. That doesn't mean that that position is not available. It just means that maybe it's a different one. So you'd want to communicate that. And it'll usually surface pretty quickly when you're talking to them that, oh, wow, I'm interviewing for a different position. I thought that you're asking me questions that don't make sense. So figure it out. I wouldn't walk out of that interview. I would continue talking to them and either see if you can direct and figure out what happened, or try to impress them for the job they're interviewing you for. Maybe, who knows, maybe you're qualified for it. So definitely don't walk out. You don't want to leave any opportunity sort of on the table. So I would just kind of stick it out, indicate to the person interviewing you that maybe you thought you were interviewing for a different position, and is that position still available, and see where it goes from there. This is pretty rare though, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if it does come up, just stick it out, finish the interview. If anything, it's just good practice for you. You can never get enough practice interviewing.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I've been in that position, but I just did what Josh said, and that's the way it worked out. I just didn't get an offer because at the end I told him I wasn't interested.
Great. And we got one more, I think, from Chris.
Yeah. So Chris says, what advice would you give to someone with a disability trying to compete with other non-disabled individuals?
Chris, so that's a great question. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have a great answer. This is not something I've encountered a whole lot as a hiring manager or as somebody who was interviewing for jobs. So I empathize, sympathize with this question. I wish that I had a great answer. So what I would say is, first of all, if you're in the U.S., the Americans with Disabilities Act, I think covers a lot of these situations. So hopefully companies will not be discriminating against you because of your disability. And so I think your question might be, if I'm disabled relative to someone else, how do I compete? And I think the answer is, first of all, to make sure that the person that's interviewing you is aware of whatever your limitation is, and then work hard to demonstrate to them that you can produce good work and produce good results in an interview despite that limitation. So again, when people are being hired, it's not so much, what's your technical proficiency, it's what's it going to be like to work with this person. So even if you have a disability, if you have a disability, but you're a good person to work with, you do quality work, you're able to communicate back and forth with them in terms of deadlines and responsibilities and deliverables and all that good stuff, and you do it well, that's really what you need to demonstrate. So it's really hard without more detail here to give you a more specific answer, but hopefully, at least with the laws in the US, you shouldn't be sort of explicitly discriminated against. And remember that your job is to demonstrate to them that you would be a good part of their team. Good people overcome a lot of things that might cause other people to shy away. So if you're a good developer, or you're good and proficient at the work that you're applying for, that will stand out. And so just look for ways to demonstrate that. Chuck, I don't know if you had anything to add there.
I do. I've actually hired people with disabilities. I've hired people with what would be considered learning or cognitive disabilities, everything from attention deficit disorder to depression to, just other things, dyslexia. I've hired people who have physical disabilities, be that with just, I'm trying to remember what the exact situation is with one person, but I've hired people who were wheelchair bound. The other person had some kind of movement disorder, and I don't remember exactly what all the details were. But in all of these situations, they came in, they demonstrated they could do the job. I mean, most of the jobs I've hired for, you fly a desk. So it doesn't matter how you sit at or under the desk. So they showed up, they demonstrated they were the right person, and they got the job. I know that there is always concern over whether or not people have specific biases and things like that. But what I found is that if you can find people who can look past those biases, then, those are the people you want to work for anyway. The other thing I will say about that is that if you can find a company that has already hired people that have your particular type of disability, then in a lot of cases, that's a good indication that they're not going to have any issue with that, and that they'll look beyond it to what you can actually contribute. So it may take a little bit more research. You may find out that, oh, well, when they designed their new building, they made it ADA accessible or something like that, and they made a big deal out of that, and that's how that worked out. But yeah, I mean, keep trying. And yeah, generally, I haven't seen this be a major issue, but it really depends on the people involved. So yeah, I mean, for the positions we're talking about, you're sitting at a desk and you're writing code. So if you can show them that you can sit at a desk and write code, then it shouldn't be a problem.
That's great insight, Chuck.
Alan asked, are you going to talk about actual salary negotiation? And Josh, I see you responded in the chat and said, yes, that's coming up next. Yeah, what we're doing here is we're just setting up the basis for the conversation around the offer. And this is basically what leads into the offer. This is what gets you the better offer. And then we'll talk about how that all works and where to go from there. That's what's coming up next. Ankit says, how much accuracy do you expect from code on whiteboard interviewing?
Yeah, so Chuck, I think you have quite a bit more experience here than I do. So if it's okay, I'm going to toss this one over to you because I think you'll just give a better answer.
I hate those interviews. I never made
Yeah,
it.
me too.
I've sat in on some of the companies I worked for where they required it, and just get up there and do your best. If you leave a semicolon off, or you misspell a library or a function or a method or something, I mean, you can just point out, oh, oops, I guess the compiler or the interpreter would have caught that. The other thing is that there are so many other things that go into the interview that I wouldn't stress too much about this. Nobody does well on the code on whiteboard interviews unless they're exceptionally skilled and they can kind of envision that code. Most people, they get up there, they get nervous, they do okay or they don't, and then you can kind of go from there. So I wouldn't stress too much about it. If you know it's coming, you might want to practice a little bit, but other than that, just get up and do your best. And if you can demonstrate the knowledge of the technology over the semantics and syntax, then you're probably going to do fine. If it looks like the code they're expecting to see and there are a couple of minor syntax errors, I think most people look past that because everybody makes those. They get yelled at by their compiler, and then they just fix it and move ahead.
Sounds good to me. Good answer, Chuck.
All right. So once again, if you drop over to the offers page, or if you go to bit.ly/FSN, that's Fearless Salary Negotiations. I can't even say it. Fearless Salary Negotiations, and the -RR is Ruby Rogues, which was the podcast that Josh and I did together with a few other folks from that podcast. But yeah, go check that out. Get the bundle, get the video on how to get noticed, and let's go ahead and move ahead, Josh.
Sounds good. One thing that we didn't mention, Chuck, just so everybody knows, is I'm showing the Ultimate Salary Negotiation Bundle here on screen, but I think we discussed earlier that the bonus that you're offering is any of those Fearless Salary Negotiation Bundles. You buy that, you get the bonus, right?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so onward. So Alan, hopefully you're still around. on to negotiation strategy. So we set this up, the first half was interviewing. The purpose of your interviews is really twofold. One, get a job offer, but two, to get the best job offer possible. And so that second part is really more about negotiating the best result. So you tell the story about how the company will be better if you're a part of it. That's how you get job offers, but you also want to make sure that those offers you get are the best offer possible. And so that's where negotiation strategy comes in. So I want to walk through again. This is very tactical. I'm going to give you specific tactics that you can use to take a job offer, make sure that it's as good as possible when you get the job offer, and then negotiate the best possible result for your job offer. So the first thing I want to encourage people to do is negotiate. So I feel like this is worth a minute or two of just encouraging you to negotiate. There are lots and lots of reasons. My book is called Fearless Salary Negotiation for a reason. It's because when I talk to people about negotiating, when I coach people on negotiation, when I bump into people who have questions about interviewing and negotiation, they're scared of different things. They have fear. And so they spend a lot of time talking themselves into reasons to not negotiate. So the first thing I want to say is that you should negotiate. If you're sitting there right now and you're watching this webinar with Chuck and me, and you're wondering, well, but maybe in my situation, I shouldn't negotiate because ... I can almost 100% guarantee that reason is not a good enough reason to not negotiate. I recently had a conversation with someone, and they asked me specifically, when should you not negotiate your salary? And that's one of the few questions that I've been asked in an interview where I was stumped. I could not think of a situation where you shouldn't negotiate. And the reason is that ultimately the worst case scenario, if you negotiate, is that the company you're negotiating with will say, oh, no, we made you the best offer that we had available, and we can't budge off that offer. That's as bad as it gets. I have not worked with anybody who had an offer retracted because they negotiated. And I know people are very afraid of that. That doesn't happen. If you think about it, really quickly, the reason is if you think about all the energy and time and money that companies spend to interview people and get to the point where they're making a job offer, they're not just going to toss all that spent time, money, and energy out the window because you negotiated. Instead, what they'll say is, no, we made you an offer because we want to bring you on board. However, we cannot budge on the offer we made you. And that's about as bad as it gets. Also, people are afraid that they will start off on the wrong foot because they negotiated. I can tell you, again, from personal experience, that when people negotiate, it demonstrates a certain level of business acumen that is usually pretty attractive for companies. So if anything, it's a wash, it doesn't matter. And it can actually be a pretty big plus if you negotiate, because it shows that not only is this person able to write code for us or do good work for us, but they're also thinking at a higher business level of, you know, profit and loss and how to make money and be more efficient. So you should negotiate. That's my first negotiation strategy or tactic, is you should do it. And if you're trying to think of reasons to talk yourself out of it, hopefully I'll give you some easy to use tactics here that will make it easier for you to kind of get over that hump and just try to negotiate, just make a counteroffer. So the first negotiation opportunity that you have will actually happen during the interview process, and it's usually pretty early on. I call it the dreaded salary question. And so this is a salary negotiation tactic, which is why it's in the salary negotiation section of our presentation here today. But it actually happens early on in the interview process, and sometimes will be one of the first questions that anybody at the company will ask you. So let's talk about what the dreaded salary question is, and then I'll tell you how to get past it. So the question is something like, and most of you have probably heard this before, so where are you right now in terms of salary, and what are you looking for if you make this move? So this is a two-part question. What they're asking you for is what's your current salary and what's your desired salary if you come work for us. So again, this is pretty sneaky because this is asked early in the interview process. When you're that early in the process, you're usually in a mindset where what your goal is to get to the next step of the interview process. And when you're in that mindset, you're very inclined to just give answers to every question that you're asked, which means that you would just give an answer to this question. You tell them what your current salary is and what your desired salary is. The problem is that answering those questions can cost you a lot of money later on when you get a job offer, because now the job offer is not based on the value that you've demonstrated to them. It's not based on how much better the company will be if you're a part of it. It's based on what they know about your current salary or your desired salary. On the current salary side, I can give you a pretty good answer of what to do, and on the desired salary side. But I want you to remember this question. So that's what this little icon is for, is this seems like an innocuous question. It comes up early. You're going to want to answer it, and you should not answer this question. I know a lot of you will have questions on this, and I'm looking forward to discussing those. But I can tell you from personal experience, from all the people that I've coached, from people who've read my book, if you do not answer this question, you will make more money in the end. So how do you answer this question? The first part, the current salary part, is answered with something like this. I'm not really comfortable sharing that. I prefer to focus on the value I can add to this company and not what I'm paid at my current job. So this will usually get you through, I'd say 70% of the time, this is all they need to hear on current salary. If they continue pushing you and say, no, but we really have to know, then I found that the most effective answer that people give when I work with them is that this is proprietary information for the company that I currently work for, and I don't want to disclose that proprietary information to another company because I know that my current company would not appreciate that, and I work for them right now. So that will pretty much shut it down. It's really hard for another company to say, no, we want you to do things. We want you to share proprietary information, because on the flip side, they're hoping to hire you eventually. And so if they hire you and you're willing to share proprietary information, that's probably not good for them. So this is pretty effective. It puts up a pretty big wall. So the first one is, I'm not comfortable with that. I prefer to focus on the value I'll add. If they keep pushing, you can say, I think that's proprietary information. I prefer not to share it. So that's how you get through the current salary part of the dreaded salary question. Then there's the second part of the dreaded salary question, which is what's your desired salary if you come work for this? And a good answer to this part of the question is, I want this move to be a big step forward for me in terms of both responsibility and compensation. So again, you're not giving them an answer here, but you're indicating two pretty important things. The first one is that you want the move to be a big step forward in terms of responsibility. So again, this is focused on the value that you'll add. It's focused on how you'll improve the company if you're a part of it. And the second part is, and you want this to be a big step forward in terms of compensation. So while you're not telling them what your current salary is or your desired salary is, you are telling them you want to do more, you want to do better, and you want to be compensated for all those extra things that you're going to do to make this company better. And so this is a good way to get past the desired salary part of the question. So really quickly, I'll tell you why you don't want to tell them your desired salary. And the reason is, I can rephrase that question in a way that's a lot more realistic and actually reflects what the question is asking you to do. And I think when I do that, you'll understand why it's a bad idea to answer it. So rephrasing the second part of the dreaded salary question, which is what's your desired salary? It really is something like, can you take a guess what we pay people to do the job that you're interviewing for? That's what it's like. They're asking you to literally guess how much they might pay you if you take that job, because that's what you're doing, is guessing. So if you say a low number, you guessed wrong, and that means they can make you a lower job offer, and they will. If you guess a really super high number, then that may disqualify you or something like that, right? Or it may make it harder for them to give you a reasonable number later on. So you're always going to miss. You're never going to guess dead on. So you're almost always going to cost yourself money or make it harder to negotiate later on. So you're better off not guessing what they pay people to do the job and letting them tell you that later on when they make you an offer. So don't disclose your desired salary. If they continue to push on this one, I found that a good technique here is to say, it sounds like you're trying to qualify me for a range. If that's the case, I'm happy to tell you if that range is in the ballpark if you want to tell me what it is. And so you're doing a couple of things here. One of them is you're flipping it around on them. So sometimes they'll tell you explicitly, we need to qualify you for a range so we don't waste everybody's time. That's a line that I hear sometimes. And you're saying, great, tell me what the range is. I'll tell you if you're in the ballpark. But the nice thing about this answer is you're not committing to that range. You're saying it's in the ballpark. So all you're doing is letting them tell you the range, getting information, and letting them know that they're not wildly out of range. And so that still leaves you completely open to negotiate later on when they make you an offer. You've not committed to be in that range or around it. You just told them that the range they said is in the ballpark. So I don't want to beat this drum too long, but do not disclose your current or desired salary in your interviews. Don't disclose your salary numbers. Don't divulge them. It will cost you money later on. I know this is uncomfortable for people, but this is the biggest mistake that people I work with make or have made that I have to help them fix, help them unwind, because they start the interview process, they tell them their current salary and their desired salary, and then it's very hard to move out of that box when you start negotiating, because the company knows these numbers and they know how hard they can push you and where you're coming from and all that good stuff. So don't disclose salary numbers. Okay, moving along into what's more sort of typical salary negotiation that you guys are probably expecting, guys and girls. What's your minimum acceptable salary? So before you get that job offer, before you finish your interviews, set your minimum acceptable salary. This number is a walk-away number. It's a line in the sand. And the reason that you're doing your minimum acceptable salary before you get the offer is because you literally want to make sure that you do not accept a job offer if they do not pay, excuse me, your minimum acceptable salary. So you want to make sure that if you end up working at the company, you're making at least the minimum that you require to do that job. So how do you set that number? There are two things that you can use to think about when you're doing this. The first one is what I call reference points. And these are sort of facts. These are objective. Things like your market value. What's the market value for your skill set and experience in your industry? What is the value of the work that you do? Could also be your current salary. So you're not disclosing your current salary, but you know your current salary, and that should affect what you look for if you make a jump. Chances are you want to increase your salary or at least break even. That might move up or down depending on what region you're moving to, if you're moving to a different part of the company. So you want to use these objective reference points to say, based on all the facts that I know about how much people make doing this job, maybe what the company range is paying and all that good stuff. What's a good baseline to start with? And once you have that baseline for your minimum, then you can adjust it by overall feel. These are subjective things. So how do I feel about the company? How excited am I for this opportunity? How excited am I to work for this team? How long is the commute that I'm going to have to do every day? Do I want to move from Los Angeles to Phoenix? And these kinds of questions. And you can quantify those and kind of massage that initial number that you set to be your true minimum acceptable salary. I encourage people, when you set this number, to literally write it down on a note card or a piece of paper and put it in your pocket or put it in your dresser or something like that. And the reason is that you want to set it early because you're very likely to want to change this later on when you get in the negotiation. Negotiations are stressful. That's the whole reason that I wrote my book. And that's the reason that I'm so process oriented. This is part of the process. Record your minimum acceptable salary so that you can stick to it when it comes time to make a decision about whether or not to go with the company. It's also a pretty key part of your negotiation strategy, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So before you start negotiating, before you get a job offer, pick your minimum acceptable salary number, write it down, and stick to it. This is literally a walk-away number. If the company cannot meet this number, you will not go work there. Okay, so now you've got an offer in hand, you've got your minimum acceptable salary set. What are you going to do? How do you negotiate? So the short answer is that you should counteroffer. And you should counteroffer somewhere between 10 and 20% above the offer they made you. So if they offered you $50,000, then you're going to counter somewhere between $55,000 and $60,000. And the way that you sort of move up and down in this 10 to 20% range is basically the easiest way to describe it is how badly do they need you specifically to do this job? So hopefully during the interview, asking questions like the ones I suggested earlier and using other tactics, you've learned not only about what the company is trying to do, but you've learned specifically how desperate they are to bring you personally, specifically, into the job that you're interviewing for. If they're extremely desperate, if you can tell they really want you in particular to do this job, they want to bring you on board pretty badly, then you're going to counter closer to 20% or at 20%. If they're not that interested, maybe they're interviewing you as a favor because you happen to know the CEO's brother-in-law or something like that. You're going to counter somewhere closer to 10% because you know that they're not really eager to bring you on, so you don't want to push too hard. So the short version here is you're going to counter 10 to 20% above their job offer unless that will not get you to your minimum acceptable salary, and then your counter is just your minimum acceptable salary. So if your counter would be above the minimum, you counter the 10 to 20% number. If it wouldn't be above the minimum, then you just tell them, I'm sorry, but I can't accept the job for less than whatever your minimum acceptable salary is. And remember, that's a line in the sand that you drew before you got the offer. So you made that decision objectively, and you're just letting them know that you haven't met my requirements and I can't come aboard unless you meet this number. Once you've countered, the company will go consider it. Almost always, they'll say, oh, okay, we just need some time to think this over. We're going to go run it by finance. They'll come back to you and they'll say, well, you countered us at $60,000 and we offered you $50,000, but we can't come up more than, say, 55. So they offered 50, you countered at 60, they came back and met you in the middle at 55. The good news is you just made $5,000 and all you did was counteroffer. But a lot of people will stop negotiating at this point. They'll be happy with their 5,000. They'll say, that's great, I'll take it. But what they should have done is push just a little bit harder. So what you want to do before you even counter a lot of times, since you know where you're going to counter once you calculate it, is think about what you'll do when they respond to your counter. So the nice thing about this is you've now created a really narrow window for negotiation, somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 in my example. So there's only so many increments between 50 and 60,000 that they could respond with. They might accept your counter at 60. They might stand pat on 50, or they're probably going to come back somewhere between $51,000 and $59,000. So you just think about, what will I say when they come back to me? What am I going to say to them when they come back to me at 52,000? My advice would be to see if you can push them to maybe 54,000. So you would say, oh, that sounds good. Can you come up to $54,000 and I'm on board, right? Maybe they come up to 59,000 when you counter. So you countered at 60 and they came back and said, we can't come all the way to 60, we can do 59. What would you say? My advice would be to say, that sounds good. Maybe you don't want to push any harder. It sounds like they're really, doing what they can to bring you on board. So it's important to think through and script out what you'll do when they respond to your counter, because there's still room to make another $1,000 or $2,000 there. Or this is also when you can negotiate other benefits like your paid vacation days, for example, or a signing bonus or relocation bonus. This is when you have that opportunity. If they say no to whatever your last ask was, then you can move and say, okay, well, I was hoping for 58,000. You only came up to 55. I appreciate that. Can you do 55,000 and an extra week of paid vacation every year? If you can do that, I'm on board. And then you kind of walk down your top 1, 2, or 3 other benefits that you'd like to negotiate. So this is a common question that I get is, when do I get to negotiate the other benefits? The answer is when they say no to your last ask in terms of salary, then you can move over. Once you've maximized your base salary, then you can focus on the other benefits. Okay, so that's your salary negotiation strategy. Hopefully you've got lots and lots of tactics there. I know that you probably have some questions. So again, go check out bit.ly/FSN-RR. Get the Fearless Salary Negotiation Bundle of your choice, whichever one works best for you. I recommend the Ultimate Salary Negotiation Bundle. It's got tons of stuff now. I'm adding new stuff all the time, and you'll get that stuff included if you already have that bundle. And of course, Chuck's bonus offering that he told us about earlier is part of that, and you'll get pretty early access to that too. So Chuck, what are the questions that we have about salary negotiation?
All right, I'm going to save Duncan's question for a little bit later. If we have time, we can answer it, or if we feel like it's not on topic, we can answer it in another video and just put it on YouTube. So I'm going to go to Judah's question next, and he says, how do you answer how much? Oh, we already answered this. How much salary do you expect? And you covered that pretty thoroughly. In fact, I asked him if that was enough, and he said yes. So Alex asks,
Awesome.
How do you figure out what your salary should be?
Good question, Alex. So I alluded to this a little bit, but the first thing is that you do what I call a market value estimation. So the kind of quick and dirty version of that process is you want to start at the highest level you can, which is an industry-wide estimation. So what do junior software developers tend to make in the United States? And if you can, narrow it down by industry, right? So are you working for a tech company? Are you in healthcare? So what does a junior software developer working in the healthcare industry tend to make? You can usually get pretty good information on this with a few places that I recommend: payscale.com, salary.com, and glassdoor.com. My guess is that you've probably heard of all three of those. Typing them in chat right now. So check out those three places. And what you want to do is look, they'll usually give you a pretty broad spread. So they'll say, well, a junior developer in healthcare industry makes somewhere between $55,000 and $70,000 a year, right? And so now you've got a range. You'll do that a couple of times and you'll get kind of a feel for what's the midpoint. Well, it's about 60 to 65,000. So now you've got your industry-wide baseline. Once you have your industry-wide baseline, the next phase is geography. So are you working on the West Coast? Are you in the Northeast, the Southeast, the Midwest? Where are you working? Usually those companies will pay a little bit differently, and you can narrow it down again using those same tools. But if you're going to work in that region, you might also go to conferences in that region, or you might know people who work in that region, and you can ask them to kind of validate if that range sounds right to them or not that you found. So you said 60 to 65, and you're going to work on the West Coast, and they say, well, actually out here, it's closer to 70,000. You say, great, so $70,000 for a junior developer on the West Coast. Then the last layer is that you look at the specific company that you're interested in and see what you can learn about it. You'll notice that as you go down these three layers, the information is harder and harder to get. So you may not be able to get company-specific information, but you might be able to. A lot of times you're interviewing at the company because you knew somebody who already worked there, maybe a developer who already worked there. And you can ask them to tell you what they know about salaries for software developers. I know that you're thinking, well, I can't just ask somebody what they're making, and that's probably true. So here's a hack that I like to use to get around that problem. And the hack is, don't ask them what they're making. Ask them what they think somebody like them would make if they got hired tomorrow, and they'll tell you what their salary is. So instead of saying, how much are you paid as a junior software developer in healthcare industry, you can say, if somebody that had about the same amount of experience as you do got hired tomorrow at your company, what do you think that they would get paid? And they'll pretty much just tell you what their salary is, give or take. And so you take all that information and you roll it together. These are the reference points that I mentioned earlier. And now you have sort of that baseline for your minimum salary and what it should be. And then of course you do the adjustments that I mentioned in terms of, do I want to commute? Am I excited for this company? Do I want to move across the country? How interesting is this project that they're hiring me to do, and all that good stuff. And you move that baseline number up or down based on that information. Now you've got your minimum acceptable salary. So that's it in a nutshell.
That is so good. And that's a lot more work than I ever did. I mean, I always just talk to my friends.
Which is good. That's good data to have, but you can do better, right?
Yes,
with a little
absolutely.
bit, the whole process takes maybe 45 minutes to an hour. I mean, we're not talking about like a days long thing there, but doing that extra work can get you a much better number that you can feel more confident about basing your negotiation on.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. I wish I had done that when I was looking for jobs. Juan asks, what about the salary desired box when you apply online? Usually it's required to enter a number to submit the application.
Yeah, I've been getting this question more and more lately, I think just because more companies are moving to online applications. So same strategy applies. You don't want to disclose your current or desired salary. The first thing I would try is just leaving it blank and seeing if the form will let you submit. Sometimes those forms they don't have validation on them, so you can actually just submit a blank field. That's great. If you must put a number into the field, I recommend putting a fake number into the field, 99999 or 1 or something like that, and see if it will let you submit that. If you can't get away with that, talk to the person who asked you to complete the application. You've usually got a recruiter that's your contact or a hiring manager. Tell them, I'm not comfortable disclosing that information. How do I submit my application without it? They'll usually say, you have to, we can't submit it without it. And then you'll push back and say, but I'm not comfortable sharing that information. And then eventually, magically, the clouds will open and you'll find some magical way that you can either submit it there or send them an email or something to get around that. So companies are trying to get that information. I still think that you should not disclose it, and there's almost always a way to get around it. So those are kind of my tactics for getting around that question if it's an online form.
Boy, I have a completely different answer to this.
All right.
And this is what comes up in my Get a Coder Job book, which is nearly done. So, you know, I'll put links out and send emails and let you all know when it's available. But anyway, my take is that you should be looking for companies in a completely different way. I mean, applying online is kind of your last ditch thing. The last ditch way you should be finding a job. You should be getting to know people, finding ways to get noticed, making friends, building relationships, and then using those to get in sort of the back door. And so if you have to fill out an application like this, for me, it's a red flag. It's like, you know what? You want as many faceless profiles as possible to come in here and fill out this form. Like, you don't know who I am. You don't care who I am. Now, if you have to find a job, then, you know, you play the games like Josh is saying. But my take is that, you know, you should be looking for jobs in other ways. You should be out there participating in the community, especially local communities, or local communities in the areas you want to work in. And then from there, finding ways to get into the company, get noticed by the company, and then get the interview without having to submit a faceless, semi-nameless application to some system where they hopefully get around to calling you back.
That's a great answer, Chuck. I love that answer. My answer just sort of assumed that you got to that stage and you had that application in front of you, but your answer is much better, which is hopefully you're applying for opportunities in a way that doesn't ever have you face that sort of catch-all online application process. Great answer.
Yeah, if you have to do it, you have to do it. But my take is that try it the other way first. Brett says, does this strategy change when a recruiter is involved? That's a really good question.
Yeah, good question, Brett. So the answer is yes. I'm sort of assuming that you're not working with a recruiter. Also, there are kind of different kinds of recruiters. So if you're working with an in-house recruiter at the company that you've applied for and you're in control of the companies that you're interviewing with, then no, the strategy does not change in that case. If you're dealing with an internal recruiter at a company, the strategy is basically designed to work in that situation. I'm assuming that you're talking about a direct hire recruiter or a third party that is helping you find jobs, is maybe making that connection. A lot of times those recruiters prefer to handle salary negotiation on their own. There are tons and tons of reasons for this, but that whole system is a lot different. So my recommendation, and Chuck, maybe yours too, would be, if you can, avoid using a recruiter and find your own opportunities, use your own network and your own contacts to find good opportunities. If you're working through a recruiter, you should talk to them and ask them what their plan is and how they manage the strategy negotiation part to learn about it. But a lot of times they work with the same companies over and over again, and they have kind of a channel that they work in terms of the salaries for the positions that they're sending over. And so salary negotiation can be much more challenging. I will say that all of the interview things that we talked about in the first part of this session today do apply in that situation. And you do still want to tell a story about how the company will be better if you're a part of it. And you want to do the best that you can to impress them so that when they're talking to that recruiter, they're willing to pay you more money because they're so impressed with you. There's usually a range of money that the recruiter and the company have more or less agreed to. You want to give them every reason to bump you into the top of that range. And the recruiter is not going to fight that because they're usually going to get some piece of that salary in terms of their commission. So you may not directly negotiate salary. The second half of this webinar may not directly apply to your situation. Certainly everything that we talked about in the first half will apply in that situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think recruiters generally muddy the waters. I've also found that some companies wind up paying lower salaries to candidates that come in through a recruiter, and then other companies only hire through recruiters since they pay competitive salaries and then just pay the recruitment fees. So it really depends on the company, and neither the recruiter nor the company is going to tell you which they are.
That's right.
So you have these other forces now that are involved besides you and the company that are going to make this decision a little bit trickier. So, you know, if the process is semi-transparent, yeah, you might be able to work through the recruiter and use a lot of these strategies. But in a lot of cases, the recruiter is going to have some feel for either how likely you are to get hired or how much they can get you in salary. And so they will push depending on whether or not they just want to close the deal and get their commission, or whether or not they think they can get you a higher salary, because again, that means a higher commission, as Josh said. So yeah, it gets really tricky because you've got this gear in the middle of your motor that you're not quite sure what it's going to do to the traction you can get.
Yeah, everything you said is 100% spot on as far as I know, Chuck. That's a good answer.
Yep. Juan asked, should you negotiate on your first dev job?
Yes.
I am nodding vigorously.
That's an easy one. I like easy questions. Yes.
Well, it comes back to that discussion, right, of confidence. And, you know, I'm coming in with very little experience and I don't have a lot to offer, or so you think. And so it's, can I really negotiate with them? And the answer is if you've done your job during the interview and you've kind of painted that picture in their head so they can see you sitting in that desk and getting work done and the heavens partying and angels singing, then you can negotiate a salary. And so just assume that you did that. You should have some gut feel as to how well you did, but you should be able to negotiate something. And they won't be shocked if you ask for a little bit more. So just go for it. There is literally almost no downside to that.
Yeah, and so I guess I'll unpack a little bit. I thought about just giving a single syllable answer here, but I'll you gave me some food for thought there, Chuck. So the reason that you'll negotiate at any level is that almost always an offer that you get has some room on the top end in case you happen to negotiate. It's rare that the company will actually make you the best possible offer that's available. And so the way, ultimately, the negotiation process, which we didn't talk a whole lot about, you know, how the kind of philosophy behind this, but ultimately what you're trying to do is get an offer that reveals to you something about the company's ability to pay, what the range is they're willing to pay. If they haven't told you explicitly, you know, once they make you an offer and you have not told them your current or desired salary, that the offer must be based on how much value they perceive you to bring to the role, but it probably is not the maximum value. And so this is true whether you're on your first job as a junior developer or your fifth job and you're going to work at Apple as a senior developer, whatever it is, they're probably not offering you the max that they can pay you. And so when you counter, what you're doing is you're trying to see where is that max. And so that 10 to 20% counter range that I mentioned, it's specifically engineered to figure that out in your situation based on not anchoring against your current salary or desired salary. So if you're an entry-level developer, they offer you $50,000. There's a really good chance that $50,000 is not the most they're willing to pay you. It's just what they offered you. So the reason that you should negotiate is to figure out if maybe the real number that they're willing to pay is $53,000 or $55,000. And you do that by negotiating. Like Chuck said, they may say, oh no, we're not negotiating. That's our final offer. Okay, so now you know you got the best offer available. Or they come back and they say, well, we said 50, you said 55, we'll do 53. There you go. So now you figured out closer to where their maximum willingness to pay is. And again, that's true at all levels. So the reason you're negotiating is not because you're senior or you have lots of experience. It's because there's probably room to negotiate and you want to do that, or you're just leaving money on the table.
Yep. And you make that $3,000 in the time it takes to say 55 and for them to reply 53. And then you say, okay.
Yeah, it's really easy if you do it. I mean, I don't want to trivialize, you know, my book, but it's really not that hard. I think the hard part is actually, you know, kind of getting up the courage to do that step, to take that step and counter. But once you've said, I'm going to counter offer at 55,000, actually delivering that counter is not hard and not time consuming. It could be pretty valuable, you know, dollars per minute in terms of, you know, if your hourly bill rate, if you look at that, it could be at $3,000 for like 10 minutes of work, which is pretty great.
All right, we've got a couple of questions here about negotiating raises.
Yeah, so
do we want to dig into that?
We could. It's up to you. I'll say this: at the link that's on screen, there's a raise and promotion bundle. It's the middle bundle that has a 50-minute video course on how to get a promotion or raise. It's got a guide. It's got a worksheet. All of that good stuff is in there. So my book covers this. The third part of the book talks about it. So all that information is out there if you want to go get it. The Fearless Salary Negotiation book is meant to be evergreen, which means that any moment in your career, you can pick it up and there's something in there that you can use right now to figure out how to get paid what you're worth. So Chuck, it's up to you. I think
Yeah, go 5 minutes.
All right, 5 minutes on raises and promotions. So I consider them to be very similar but different things, first of all. So the process for asking for a raise and the process for asking for promotion, they're more or less the same process with a few different details that vary. So at the highest level, my raise and promotion process is designed with the following philosophy in mind. You set your goal, you demonstrate that you've earned that goal, and then you go ask to make it official. So it's really simple at that level. So if you're trying to get a raise, you figure out what you want to get a raise to. It's important to give goals and specific details to your manager because your manager is a very busy person and you don't want to make them think. The harder they have to think and the harder they have to work, the less likely they're going to do that work to get you a raise or promotion. You want to give them everything that they need to just rubber stamp a raise or promotion with a bow on it. And so you want to set your goal. If it's a raise, that's a target salary. If it's a promotion, your goal is a target job. You want to figure out how you can justify that you've already demonstrated that you have achieved that goal. So if it's a target salary, that usually means quantities. So what are you doing since your salary was last set to add additional value to the company above what was expected of you? So I know that sounds sort of wordy, but the idea is that you're saying, we set my salary a year ago. I'd like a higher salary now. Here are the things that I've done to earn that higher salary that you didn't expect me to do when you paid me my current salary. And so you literally list those things out and focus on what is the business value, the quantity or dollars that are brought in additional revenue or saved in time or development effort or whatever. Try and list those things out to make your case for the specific target that you've set. For promotion, it's a target job. This one's actually easier because usually you can find the job description for your target job that you're after, and you can find your own job description, and you can compare them side by side and find the 3 bullet points that don't show up on your current job that do show up at your target job. Those are the 3 things that you need to do to demonstrate that you're already doing your target job. Then you put your case together, you talk to your manager in your one-on-one, and you say, I would like a raise to some number, or I would like a promotion to some job. Here are the things that I've already done to demonstrate that I'm ready for and have already earned this raise or promotion. What can we do to make this happen, and what does the timeline look like? So that's my overall strategy. The last piece is after that conversation, you should send an email that summarizes the case that you built while you're doing this process. The reason you're sending that email is not for HR documentation purposes or anything. It's to, again, make things as easy as possible for your manager to help you to get the raise or promotion you're asking for. And so by giving them your written case, you're giving them something that they can literally pass around internally when somebody says, okay, Josh wants another $20,000. That's good, but why should we give it to him? Then your manager can produce a nice, well-argued, well-written case that you put together that clearly lays out the case for why you deserve that $20,000 or that next job that you're pursuing. And so you get to make your case to your manager, to finance, to the director of your department, whoever those people are, on your own, in your own words, as opposed to depending on your manager to make your case for you, which your manager is very unlikely to do as good a job as you would do. So do the job or demonstrate that you're already bringing in additional revenue or saving the company money to justify the salary that you're asking for, and then ask to make it official. That's my, in a nutshell, that's my raise and promotion process. I will also say, outside of the bundle that I mentioned earlier, I'm putting together right now a course that's a self-paced email course. And Chuck, maybe offline, I'll talk to you more about this because I don't think I've even told you about it yet. But it's a course that walks you through this whole process over the course of a month. So this doesn't exist yet, but maybe Chuck, we can email folks when I've got something more formal to share. And it's self-paced. It'll have some video components, homework assignments every week, so that if you're not comfortable with what I was just telling you, or you're not comfortable kind of reading something and doing it on your own, this process will literally walk you through it week by week and say, this week you're going to do these 2 things. And then you're going to email Josh and show him that you did those 2 things, and he'll review them. And when everything is done correctly, you go to the next step. So I'm working on that right now, and Chuck and I will tell you more about it later on.
Yeah, definitely. We have everyone's email, so we'll let them know when that's available.
Awesome.
It looks like Ankit, I'm hoping I'm saying that name right, is asking, what about lateral moves within the same company? So if you're in a large organization, you have another department that wants you, how do you negotiate salary in that case? Because they probably already have your number, right?
Yeah. So in that case, I don't model that as like a starting salary negotiation. So what we talked about today in the presentation was what I call starting salary negotiation, meaning your starting salary at a new company. That question, that's more like a lateral move or a raise or promotion within a company. So yes, you should assume that they know your salary, and it would be that same process. So if you want to move laterally, if you just want the title change, so if you want to move from development to ops or something like that, right? You want to move laterally. Then you just want to try and demonstrate that you can do that job and you're qualified for it. If you also want a salary increase, you need to go through that process to demonstrate, yeah, I can move to that job, and here are the things that I can do that bring value to the company in quantities to justify the salary increase that I would like. And maybe one of those things is your market research that we talked about earlier. So you look and you say, well, I'm in this job, I'm already qualified to do this job in ops, and I've looked up what the salaries for people are doing this role in ops, and they're $10,000 more than I'm making now. So you want to set that target of $10,000 more, justify it by saying, I can already do the roles and responsibilities associated with that job, so you should promote me, and I can already do the things that will save the company money or be more valuable, and also the market value for that role is higher, and so I would like this target salary.
All right. Daniel asked, what about when you get promoted and you're not comfortable with the salary increase? Should you negotiate that or go job hunting?
First, negotiate, and then job hunting, maybe. So you want to start by negotiating it. I think it's okay to let your manager know, hey, this is great. Thank you so much for getting me promoted. I really appreciate it, but I thought for sure that this would come with a larger pay increase. So can you help me understand what the timeline is and what I need to accomplish to justify some pay increase, another $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever that number is. And so it's sort of a hybrid of the whole raise and promotion process that I talked about, but also just collaborating with your manager and saying, well, this is a little disappointing to me. And what you're trying to figure out is that raise that you want available to you if you can demonstrate that you are qualified for it, or is that raise not available? In other words, is the company not willing to pay the raise that you think that you should get for doing that job? If it's not available because either the company just doesn't have the money or they don't value it in that way, then you might need to go job hunting. So the first thing that you want to do is just figure out if there is that salary available and work with your manager to say, what are my goals? What's my plan and what's the timeline? Those are the two key components of something like this. You have to have a plan, goals to accomplish, and a timeline. How long is this going to take? 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? And work with your manager to figure out if you could put that down. Because your manager will either be able to say, yeah, you need to show proficiency in these 3 areas, and then we can give you a raise of $10,000 in 6 months. We'll reevaluate. Or they'll say, oh yeah, we just don't pay that role what you are hoping for. That's just not, our pay grades don't align there. This role doesn't make that kind of money in our organization. And then if you feel that you should get paid that and it's very important to you, then you would go looking for jobs where they do value that role in the way that the market says they should value it, and pursue those jobs to see if you can move into that role at a different organization and make the money that you've estimated that you deserve.
All right, the last question in the chat is from Andrew. I haven't been chiming in on these because I think your answers are spot on. Any strategies when the negotiation is a conversion from contractor to full-time employee?
Yeah, so I actually coached somebody a while ago on this. And what we did was, first of all, she knew what she was making as a contractor. She was doing pretty well. And the company was trying to bring her on full-time. And so the first thing we did was the market value estimation, right? So I think it's important to figure out, okay, well, what is a full-time person making in this role for a company? And the reason you have to do that is it's really hard to compare what you're making as a contractor to what you'll make as an employee, because the company takes on so many of the expenses as an employer that you handled as a contractor out of pocket. So if you're making $100,000 revenue as a contractor, there are a lot of expenses that you're responsible for that the company is not. And so you have to sort of deduct what you're making as a contractor. You have to deduct from that number your cost of health insurance, for example, or retirement, or whatever you're contributing to. So I think it's better to try and decouple them, figure out what the market value estimate is for somebody doing that job full-time in that industry, and negotiate based mostly on that market estimate. You can use the contractor information as sort of a feather in your cap. If you're a really well-paid contractor, then you know that you can bump up your market value estimate a little bit, but it's not really apples to apples. So you can't say, well, I'm making $100,000 as a contractor, I want you to pay me as $100,000, because the company if they're only paying you $100,000 directly as a contractor, to hire you full time and pay you $100,000 actually costs them $150,000 or so. And so you've got to account for the fact that they're going to take on a lot of expenses that you don't have as a contractor. Chuck, I think you might have some experience here as well, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So I've made the conversion from full-time to contractor. I have not made the conversion back the other way. But what I along with what Josh has shared with us, the only other thing that I would put out there is that as a contractor, I'm really a fan of value-based pricing, which means that you have already had a conversation with the company and you understand the value that you bring to the company, just based in the work that you're doing. So if you're coming to them and you're saying, look, we negotiated a price of, $30,000 for this project and $50,000 for this other project, then you come in and say, and both of those projects together, we negotiated, and I'm fairly certain that you've made $80,000 or $800,000 on the $80,000 that you've spent, for me working. So then you can start to have a valid value-based negotiation on your salary. Just keep in mind that, as Josh pointed out, salary is a market, and so it's a little bit different thing. It's not apples to apples. And so when you're making that negotiation, yes, take all those other things into account, but also take into account, look, I am bringing a ton of value your way. And, so if we're going to make this transition, then, I want to be compensated accordingly. One other thing I'll point out is that if they insist that you get sort of a market rate on your salary, and that's considerably less than you're making, or it's not quite what you wanted, but you can, it's enough, it meets that minimum number that Josh pointed out earlier, then what you can do is you can start negotiating on things like profit sharing and stock options and things like that. And from a contractor to full-time, that is a much easier thing to go into and discuss with them, as opposed to somebody coming in cold off the street, because you, in effect, know what the results were, or you should know what the results were of your work. And so you should be able to take that all the way to the bank and say, look, I know that I am worth, $800,000 to this company based on my work. And so, if I'm going to come in as a full-time person, then I need at least this level of salary if their offer isn't there, and then say, and I'm willing to be compensated in these other ways to make up for what I bring. And then you can go into the things like stock options and profit share and things like that.
That sounds good. I like that answer.
All right. In India, contract to full-time is an increase in salary, whereas outside is decrease. What's a good borderline if you're coming down? I'm not sure I completely understand the question.
Yeah, me either, Chuck.
We talked about it, possibly being a decrease in compensation if you're doing contract full time. If it's going the other way and it's an increase in salary or an increase in overall value, then just treat it like they're going to have some number because they've been paying you, but
yeah, if it's an increase, I would just negotiate it.
Yeah,
using the strategy that we talked about today. Yeah, it moves into a more standard thing.
Yep. And if that doesn't answer your question, then hopefully you can pop something else in the chat before we wrap this up. Ankit wants to estimate how much is acceptable to decrease in salary going from contractor to full-time. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so I think Josh gave a really good answer to this, and basically, yeah, those are all things that you're paying for as a contractor that you're not going to pay for as a full-time employee, at least in the United States. So if you're figuring all that out, you can compare compensation package to compensation package. It's just that you have whatever your fee is as a consultant or contractor, and you compare that to the value of your salary and benefits. And, then you can compare those two numbers to each other. But sometimes that's a little bit tricky to figure out. and it's easier. And a lot of times just say, well, you know, if they're comparable packages to what I'm paying for myself, you know, then you can figure some of that out. But
yeah, I think Googling this is probably the way to go. My guess is that this not only varies by, you know, industry, but probably by geographic region or country. In terms of, you know, in the US, there are certain things that employers are required to pay for when they hire someone. That's probably also true in Europe and India and Asia and East Asia and all these other places, but the number probably varies, right? Like in Europe, they probably have different costs associated with hiring someone. So in the US, without having looked this up at all, my gut tells me it's like a 50% difference. So like I said, if you're making 100,000 as a contractor, if they bring you in-house, that same 100,000 would cost them 150,000 with all the other taxes and stuff they have to pay. So that's how much more it's costing them, which means they're going to have to bring that number down. I think Googling this is the best way to do it, because it's going to vary so much by your specific situation.
Yep.
I don't think there's like a really clear way to answer this.
Yeah, but ultimately, I mean, if they're paying for insurance and you're paying for insurance and they're close, then you can just deduct what you're paying for insurance. You know, same with 401k and everything else. And then, yeah, just use your best judgment and figure out where those numbers align and figure out if it makes sense for you to move or not. All right. Well, I just want to quickly remind everybody before we wrap up, you know, go get this bundle. I mean, I didn't even realize that there was that whole sub bundle, I guess I'll call it, on negotiating a raise. So if that's your situation, go get it. If you think you're ever going to look for a job again, which is pretty much everybody in this field, pick it up and use it the next time you're looking for a job. I just see a lot of value here, and essentially, you know, if it takes you an hour to read the book, a couple hours to go through the videos, and then 20 minutes of your time overall to negotiate $5,000 increase, it's well worth your money and time. So go check it out. That's bit.ly/FSN-RR. And yeah, I'll throw in that video about how to get noticed and effectively do your job search by getting to know people in meetup groups and email lists and forums.
Great. Thanks so much for having me in here, Chuck. I appreciate it. This is a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. Thanks for coming and sharing all this great content for free.
Oh, absolutely. Hopefully everybody found this valuable, and Chuck will be following up with some emails afterwards, so you'll be able to reach out with any follow-up questions you have, and we'll tell you more about the bundles and all that good stuff too.
Yep, definitely. All right. Well, we said we were going to be done at 3:30 Mountain Time. My time is 3:37, so we're going to wrap this up. I just want to, you know, thank you again, Josh, for coming, and I'm really excited for how much more money we're going to make people.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for coming out, everybody, and for asking such great questions and participating today. It's a lot of fun.